Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 452, The Spiritual Disease of Prejudice, Part 2, The Great Danger in Operating Outside the Boundaries of the Father's Will. The podcast objectives are analyze how you begin to overcome the spirit of prejudice, provide a definition for amorality, and reveal why many operate outside of the boundaries of the Father's will. Overcoming the spirit of prejudice. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 292 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we provided a definition of prejudice and we analyze its relationship with disobedience. Along these lines, we came to see how resisting the authority of Elohim is a spiritual career ending move, and thus we should avoid it at all costs. The reason why is sure, and we touched on it at the end of the most recent podcast. Vis-a-vis, those who operate in the spirit of prejudice are not only defiling their temples, my dear friends, they are also attempting to defile the spiritual body of Yahushua Messiah. 1 Corinthians 12 to 26 is revealing the body is one and has many members. For indeed, by one spirit, we were all immersed into one body, whether Yehudim or Greeks, and we were all made to drink into one spirit. But now Elohim has set the members, each one of them, in the body, even as he pleased. And now there are indeed many members, but one body. Elohim blended together the body, having given greater respect to that member which lacks it, that there should be no division in the body, but that the members should have the same concern one for another. Now, this passage and many others testify to the diverse nature of the renewed nation of Israel. And what is supremely powerful and revealing is Yahuwah's desire that there should be no division within the renewed nation of Israel, i.e., his spiritual body. Here lies the problem and the great peril of prejudice. Vis-a-vis, prejudice is a primary driver of division. Trust me, no degree of lawlessness promotes unity, but some degrees are deadlier than others, and this is surely the case for prejudice. This is clear to see when you realize that the renewed nation of Israel is physically diverse, and I have touched on this in prior podcasts. Along these lines, the only diversity we should be wary of is spiritual diversity. Here is why. Spiritual diversity, like prejudice, is a primary driver of division. For look, listen, it has been written, there is one body and one spirit, even as you were called in one hope of your calling. For that reason, we are commanded to stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the good news. Now, if you recall, I addressed this matter in End Times 280 the times and seasons of the sealing of the set apart ones, which was posted on May 13th, 2024. In that podcast, we analyze the danger of a spiritually mixed multitude. What I didn't state then is sure, and you should have picked up on it by now. Vis-a-vis, this model of the spiritually mixed multitude has been infected with the spirit of prejudice, which is why they are not physically diverse. Quite the contrary, they are physically homogeneous, for they place the greater emphasis on their carnal features, and they are often unconcerned about the spiritual diseases they are bringing to the table. Now, I trust I've gotten your attention with this statement, and I hope you are prepared to do everything within your power to overcome this foul spirit. If you are, you must understand the progression of prejudice the same way you came to understand the progressions of contempt, disobedience, and doubt. Along these lines, the progression of prejudice is aligned with the progression of contempt. The same way the progression of disobedience is aligned with the progression of doubt. Here is why. The goal of contempt is to cause you to operate with a spirit of prejudice. Ergo, if you have been infected with the spiritual disease of contempt, you will eventually operate in the spirit of prejudice. We know this because all who operate in the spirit of prejudice are in contempt of the Father's will. For look, listen, it has been written, Elohim is no respecter of persons, but in every nation, he who fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. Therefore, seeing as it is the will of Elohim that we should not be respecters of persons, the only way we can resist his desire and operate with a spirit of prejudice is if we are first operating with a spirit of contempt. And seeing as prejudice is the greatest spiritual heart disease of all time, it was imperative for us to spend ample time reviewing the path we must follow to reign over contempt. For where there is no contempt, there can be no prejudice. Now, the question of the hour then is simply this: how will you overcome so great an evil? Whether you are dealing with years of deeply rooted prejudice, or if you are a casual offender being plagued by petty ignorance, how do you overcome prejudice? And how do you eliminate this spirit from your heart forever? The answer is sure, and it begins with overcoming the invading army of prejudice. Enter contempt. And yet, it doesn't stop there. Quite the contrary, for the progression of contempt is aligned with the progression of prejudice. Ergo, even though you have established your reign over contempt, you have not fully eliminated its correlating progression. And this is just one of the many reasons why you cannot be content with defeating an invading army. Brothers and sisters, you must complete the work before you, and you must conquer the enemy nation. You must defeat the fatherland. The danger of amorality. Now, as I alluded to in the most recent section, the key to defeating the fatherland is by stopping its progression. And to our good fortune, we already know the progression of prejudice. It is the same as the progression of contempt. Look here, as you can see from the table to the right, I have captured each phase and the progression of contempt. And as you learned in the prior series, each phase is aligned with its corresponding degree of contempt. Phase one is manipulation, which is aligned with dishonesty. Phase two is transgression, which is aligned with unrighteousness. And phase three is separation, which is aligned with defilement. Now, the same way that manipulation, i.e., the first phase in the progression of contempt, is aligned with dishonesty, i.e., the fundamental degree of contempt, manipulation is also aligned with the fundamental degree of prejudice. Enter amorality. By definition, amorality is having or showing no concern about whether a behavior is right or wrong, operating outside or beyond a moral order or code of conduct, having no ethical standards, restraints, or principles. Now, this definition clearly reveals the danger of amorality. To wit, the commands of Elohim constitute a moral law, vis-a-vis all the commands we are to keep in our pursuit of holiness, perfection, and everlasting life should be viewed as ethical standards, restraints, and principles. Here lies the problem, vis-a-vis those who are amoral, have no ethical standards, restraints, or principles. Now, that doesn't mean they started off this way. Trust me, many of them didn't. Let me tell you something. As hard as it might be for you to believe, some of the most amoral people in our world were raised in the church circuit, and many of them are still there, while others have descended into the dying nation of Israel. Now, that being said, the question of the hour is simply, how have so many who have a religious background and were blessed to hear the restoration message, how have they fallen into immorality and descended into the dying nation of Israel? The answer is sure. It's because these dissenters have been manipulated by the spirit of dishonesty. Now, this should come as no surprise to any of us, for immorality is the primary application of dishonesty. Ergo, once you begin to operate in the spirit of dishonesty, you will eventually become infected with immorality for the following reason, which you learned in the prior series on virtue and contempt. Get this. Honesty is the conscience of your heart. It provides you with a moral compass in your heart. Ergo, those who operate in the spirit of dishonesty have no moral compass. And without a moral compass, you will always descend into amorality. The reason why is sure, vis-a-vis, you cannot perceive the Father's will without a moral compass. Ergo, you would be oblivious to many spiritual boundaries. Here lies the problem. To wit, the Father's will is defined by spiritual boundaries, and amorality is the opposite of spiritual boundaries. And this, my friends, is why so many so-called believers are as amoral as those who have no religious background. It's because they are all being manipulated. And as I have said before, and by now, you should see it is true. When you work to manipulate others, the only one you are manipulating is you. Outside the boundaries of his will. Now, in concluding this podcast, I would like to take a closer look at what is really happening when so-called religious people turn to a morality and operate outside of the spiritual boundaries, to wit, the obvious boundaries and the not so obvious boundaries. Let's get started. Now, first of all, you must realize how racism, sexism, and all the other forms of prejudice are merely surface wounds. To wit, they are not the real issue. And the only way we can eliminate these surface wounds is by attacking the real issue at the source. My dear friends, we must come to see what lies beneath the surface. Here is why. There are factions of your heart that don't want to operate within the boundaries of the Father's will. Alas, there is a supreme villain within your heart that does not want to stay in between the lines. Enter yourself. Now, we have spoken to the danger of yourself in many podcasts, and we will continue to address this imposter in this series. And yet, we will not address him or her too much after. Here is why. Your victory over prejudice marks your victory over yourself, the first of the 7 greatest enemies you will face in your quest for holiness and the seal of Elohim. My dear friends, you must believe me. I am very much looking forward to the podcast when I reveal the significance of this major milestone in your quest. But for now, we must analyze the trouble yourself is causing at this juncture. Consider this. Every time your desire is to do the Father's will, yourself will always try to get in the way. Now, along these lines, yourself will use the spirit of dishonesty to push you into the spiritual boundaries of amorality. Here, you are no longer operating with an appreciation of the boundaries of the Father's will. Neither are you doing your utmost to stay in between the lines. Quite the contrary. In this scenario, you have abandoned Yahuwah's will altogether. And in doing so, you will eventually become indifferent to all the ethical standards, restraints, and principles you once appreciated and understood. This, my friends, is the evolution of manipulation. This, my friends, is how the progression of contempt evolves into the progression of prejudice, and how an invading army opens a door for your heart to be overrun by an enemy nation. To wit, the enemy works to manipulate you in the spirit of dishonesty, i.e., the fundamental degree of contempt, to operate outside of the Father's will, in the spirit of amorality, i.e., the fundamental degree of prejudice. Alas, it is a vicious cycle, and it doesn't end there. Quite the contrary, for Satan, being a master manipulator, is not interested in petty robbery. My dear friends, he is not invested in minor crimes. No, sir. Satan is a murderer, and he was a murderer from the beginning. Trust me, he is going for the kill. And on this wise, he deceives many into believing they are in the Father's will, even though they have taken clear and obvious steps outside the boundaries of his will. This is the power of the deception, and you will fall quarry to it if you take the first step in this disastrous progression. This is why I have constantly warned this audience, and this is a matter you must believe. The moment you begin engaging the enemy in any form of dialogue, you are already being deceived. Now, here is the final word. When traveling through life, observe the signs and do your best to stay between the lines. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, Yahuwah is an Elohim of divine order, and the only way we can follow his divine order is by constraining ourselves to the boundaries of his will. This, my friends, is one of the few times when I would encourage you not to think outside the box. Trust me, that's what Satan wants you to do. And as I said before, when making decisions in this life, you must always ask yourself two questions. What does Yahuwah want me to do? And what does the enemy want me to do? My dear friends, if you start there, you will do well. For Yahuwah wants you to stay within the boundaries of his will, no matter the personal cost. As for the enemy, he will do everything he can to disqualify you by pulling you out of bounds where you will incur a terrific loss. Heretofore, I recommend stay between the lines. Remember, Yahuwah's will is the only safe space on the earth. And don't be mystified by those who are outside of his order, who appear to be getting ahead. For the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And all who are outside of his order during the great distress shall not live. In fact, they'll soon be dead. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 452, The Spiritual Disease of Prejudice, Part 2. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 453, The Spiritual Disease of Prejudice, Part 3. I'll post this podcast on Monday, April 21st, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.